I'd had enough and I was just done.
I had enough and I was done.
I walked in and I told my boss, I quit.
I walked in, I quit.
And why?
Why not? Why not?
We could do this. We could do this better.
Do things that scare you.
I felt alive all of a sudden, and it was amazing.
The Go Hunt Life Show, hosted by Todd Nevins.
I'm Todd Nevins, and I interview life hunters that reached a breaking point in their careers or life and pulled the ripcord on that safe, predictable path to embark on an unknown journey. They quit the norm, reinvented their lives, and never looked back. This episode is sponsored by one of my companies, Click Placement, a digital agency specializing in pay-per-click marketing. If you have an established company and need to fire up your search engine marketing game, Click Placement is on it. If you've recently hit the ignition switch on a new company, we will design an epic campaign around your new venture. If you want to drive traffic to generate sales or leads, build brand awareness, sell products, or generate mobile app downloads, Click Placement is the agency that can make it happen. We are specialists in PPC marketing through Google AdWords and Bing ads, and we are masters in paid advertising through Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Pinterest. Find us at clickplacement.com or on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And now, let's get back to Go Hunt Life.
My husband and I were both teachers, and he came home one day after a very difficult day in the classroom and said, Nancy, I don't want to do this. I want to quit the job and get a bicycle and go ride around the country. He wasn't just sitting back and waiting for life to happen to him. He wanted to make life into what he wanted it. And so, long story short, we ended up quitting our jobs, and we took off, and we spent the next school year cycling around the U.S. and Mexico.
That was Nancy Sathre-Vogel, and her husband were career teachers for 25 years when their two 10-year-old boys came up with an idea. The family had always done long bike rides together, but nothing like this. The family put a plan together for them to sell everything they owned, rent out their house, and ride their bicycles. Get this, from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, to the southern tip of Argentina, 17,285 miles. They finished, and it took them 3 years. This conversation is unique for a few different reasons compared to most of my guests, because Nancy and her family had a definitive endpoint, the tip of Argentina. So we go through what led up to this epic journey, how it all went, and the emotional ending of it, and then their tough decision of literally, now what do we do? What do we do next with an infinite number of options? So here it is, my conversation with Nancy Sathre-Vogel, former teacher and current author of the book Changing Gears, A Family Odyssey to the End of the World. Nancy Sathre-Vogel, thank you for joining me today on Go Hunt Life.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Where are you at right now, and what's your view? What are you looking at?
I'm actually sitting right here in the den in my house, but what I'm overlooking is my studio. I'm a metalsmith, and my entire living room is my studio. So I get to sit here at my computer chatting with you while I look at all of my tools and metals, and that's a lot of fun for me.
And you're in Boise, Idaho.
I am.
How old are you? Are you married, and do you have kids?
I am 56. Yes, I am married, and we have 2 kids, twins that are now 19.
And you just alluded to this. You are a metalsmith. That's your profession.
Yeah, I was a teacher for 21 years, and then when I left teaching to go on our bike trip that we will chat about, I left teaching, and when I came back, I ended up doing the metalsmithing rather than going back to teaching.
All right. So we're going to dive into one of the purposes of our call today. You and your husband and 2 kids left your lives a number of years back and started in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, and bicycled 17,000 miles and 15 countries all to the way to the tip of Argentina, and it took you 3 years. So let's dive in. On your Facebook page, you said that you and your husband decided that life was too short to live the life of others. When did this idea start of cycling from Alaska to Argentina? What year was it, and what was going on?
Well, you actually have to go back a couple of years before that, because we really made the hard decision back in 2006. My husband and I were both teachers, and he came home one day after a very difficult day in the classroom and said, Nancy, I don't want to do this. I want to quit the job and get a bicycle and go ride around the country. And I, of course, was mom. I was kind of just your standard mom, and I was blown away. I'm like, you want to do what? There was a long process involved, but eventually I came to realize that the man was pretty darn wise. He wasn't just sitting back and waiting for life to happen to him. He wanted to make life into what he wanted it. And so, long story short, we ended up quitting our jobs, and that was in 2006. We quit our jobs and we took off, and we spent the next school year. Now, because I was a teacher, I think in terms of school year. So we spent the boys' third grade school year cycling around the U.S. and Mexico. Now, a lot of people don't even know that part of our story. They only know about the Alaska to Argentina journey, but it actually kind of started there. And that was the biggie. That was the one where I really wrestled with it is, am I being responsible? Am I doing the right thing? Is this good for the kids? Blah, 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 blah. That year was wonderful, and we all had such a great time. And we made the decision on that journey that we were going to ride our bikes from Alaska to Argentina. So we came back to Boise for the boys' fourth grade year, and we spent that year doing all the plans, getting the house ready to rent and all of that kind of stuff. And then as soon as they finished grade 4, we flew to Alaska and took off.
That summer. Okay, so they spend their third grade. You're teaching them on the road, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Right.
And then they come back, they go back into public schools for their fourth grade year. Is that right?
Right. And I went back to teaching for that year. Uh-huh.
Okay. And then you guys shut down and head to Alaska. I mean, what did you have to do to shut down your lives? It wasn't just a year. I mean, this is going to be, I think you originally thought it was going to be 2.5 years. It turned out to 3. Did you sell your home there and sell everything that you owned before you headed to Alaska? Or how did you, logistically, what happened?
Right. So when we went for the first year, we basically did nothing. Literally, we did nothing. The idea came up in the end of March. By April, we had ordered a bicycle built for 3 made for us. And in June, we were on the road. We literally shut the door to the house and we left.
Whoa.
And we did that for that first year. So we did no preparation at all. But then you're right. For the 3 years, for 1 year, we could just kind of abandon the house. For 3 years, we couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And so we made the decision that we were going to rent out our house, which had a whole host of its own problems. We had to empty out the house. We had to get the house all fixed up and, put new carpet in and paint it. And so there were definitely some things we had to do to the house. So it was a lot of that kind of stuff so we didn't spend so much time planning our journey per se, as it was mostly just, how do you put your life on hold for 3 years?
And I mean, the big question is why? Like, why? Mm-hmm. What was the motivation? What were you seeking? What were you going after?
I think, I get asked this question a lot because our journey was so out there. So why? What? How do And I don't think there's ever, for a journey of this magnitude, I don't think there is ever one answer. I liken it to, there are millions of little snowflakes, and when enough of those snowflakes pile up together, it becomes an avalanche and you go. So I can look at some of the snowflakes that happened for us. One, my husband's father had died shortly before he came home, a couple of months before he proposed this whole idea. And I think he was probably facing his mortality. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer a couple of years before that. And so I had faced my mortality. And as an aside, what actually ended up happening was 4 days before we left on our very first journey, my mother's cancer was back, and she ended up dying toward the end of the year when we were over in Ohio. So, we were both kind of facing our mortality. We were just feeling like we had recently moved back to the U.S. after having lived overseas, and we were not particularly happy with teaching in the schools here versus the international schools. So that was another snowflake.
Okay.
Our kids had always, when they were little, they had always been with us at our school. My husband and I had taught at the same school and the kids were there. And now we were doing the typical American life where they were going off to one school and we were going off to different schools. And we felt like our lives were not united. And we wanted time together as a family. So I just think there were just a lot of reasons. No one overwhelming reason, just lots of smaller reasons.
Was there a reason or an excuse to point to leading up to your exit on your 3-year journey that you guys could have pointed to and said, now's not the time, let's wait till next year, let's wait till next year? Was there anything holding you back that you could have pointed to?
Well, absolutely. In fact, when we first came back to Boise after that first year, we had decided we would come back for 2 years. And we had come up with a 2-year timeline basically for 2 reasons. We figured both of us would get teaching jobs and we would save money. And my mom at that point, when we made the decision to do this, my mom had cancer and we were going to come back and take care of my mom. And we didn't, we were like within the 2 years, she probably would be gone. And so when we made the decision to come back to Boise for 2 years, it was with 2 goals, to save money and to take care of my mom. Well, I already mentioned that my mom died before we even got back home. So 50% of our reason for being here then no longer existed. And I was able to get a teaching job and my husband did not get one. And so we could live fine on my salary. That was no problem, but we weren't saving any money at all. We were just bringing in enough money to live. So it was at that point, it was around Thanksgiving that we realized, hey, you know what? We were here for 2 years for these 2 reasons. We're not doing either one of them. Why don't we go ahead and just move our departure date up and leave this coming June as opposed to waiting a whole extra year? Now, that's kind of the opposite of what your question was.
No, but that's...
Your question was, were there excuses that would have helped us stay? And we kind of got rid of the excuses and went straight to the let's do it.
Okay, so you did point to saving or not saving money. How were you going to pay for this journey 3 years on the road? There are still expenses. You still have to eat. You still have things that come up. How were you going to pay for this?
Right. Well, we owned our house outright. We did not have a mortgage on it. And so we were going to rent out the house, and we figured that would pay roughly half of our expenses. And then we had our retirement savings, and we were in a different boat because we had taught overseas for so long. And so the way that our international schools had worked the retirement account, rather than putting it into a protected 401k or some protected retirement account, they just gave us the money and then we had to invest it, meaning that it was not locked up into a dedicated retirement account, which meant that we could access it. And so we decided we would use the rent, we would use the income from the retirement account, and we figured that would be enough. If we did need to spend some money, we were willing to take that out of the retirement account in order to have the time with our kids now versus having a more comfortable retirement later.
Sure. Got it. Okay. So you guys get on the plane and fly to Alaska. Were all your gear, your bikes, everything on the plane with you? Did you ship everything up there waiting for you? How did that all work to get started?
Everything went with us. Now you have to remember, you have to remember that we were starting up in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, which is up on the shores of the Arctic Ocean. Prudhoe Bay really isn't a town. It's there. It exists for the oil industry. It's the end of the pipeline, and its one and only reason for existing is to support the pipeline.
Okay.
There is one little general store that oil workers could go to get chips or whatever, but basically everybody that lives up there, they all eat in the cafeteria that is provided by the oil companies. It's not really a town. So everything that we were going to need until we got to Fairbanks, 500 miles away, had to go up there with us. So when we left Prudhoe Bay, we had to be completely, totally self-contained to get down to Fairbanks, which would take us, it took us 15 days.
To go 500 miles. Is Prudhoe Bay the most logical northernmost spot to start in Alaska? Is that why you started there?
Well, it's the end of the road. Our initial plan was to start from Fairbanks. And then our sons decided that they wanted to break the world record as the youngest people to cycle the length of the Americas. And so we wrote to Guinness World Records and said, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. And they said, hey, we already have that record, but it starts up in Prudhoe Bay, which was 500 miles north of where we had planned on starting. But Prudhoe Bay is where the road ends. It is the northernmost point of the road, so it makes sense that the record would start there.
All right. So you're in Prudhoe Bay, and you're on the bikes. You've got your gear. Your first few pedal strokes south. What were you thinking? And one of the statements is, what would you do if you were not afraid? What were you afraid of on those first few pedal strokes south, if anything?
I often laugh at this one because so when we took off on that first journey, we had a bicycle built for three. So the two boys were on the same bicycle with my husband. But then riding from Alaska to Argentina, one of the boys decided that he wanted to be on a tandem with his father. The other boy wanted his own bike. And so we made the decision to give this a try, that Davey could try his own bike. And if it didn't work, then we would end up getting a tandem and me and Davey would be on the bike together. So Davey has his own bike. Remember, he's 10 years old at this point. And we didn't load him down. We didn't put any kind of weight on his bike. But what we did put on there, we had this big waterproof bag that had our 4 sleeping pads in it. Very big and bulky, but no real weight. And so we strapped that onto the back of his bike, and I didn't think anything of it because there was no weight. What I didn't think about was that anything you put on the bike is just going to change how the bike handles. And so we get on the bike here. We were in this parking lot up in Prudhoe Bay, and we all get with our bikes and we get our initial pictures taken, and we have the camera rolling, and we're all set and ready to go, and we're all excited. And Davey, we start going, and it was probably, I don't know, maybe 15 pedal strokes, and Davey came crashing down to the ground. And
the first minute.
Oh yeah, within the first few seconds of the trip, this kid had fallen, and I remember stopping my bike and running over there to help him getting up, and I remember thinking, holy cripes, what have I done? We've got 17,000 miles to go, and here this 10-year-old kid is falling. And anyway, he ended up being fine. It was just a matter of he had to kind of just get used to the feel of the bike with those pads on it, and we were also on dirt road, and he was used to riding on pavement, so that made a big difference as well. So it ended up being fine. But back to your larger question of what was I afraid of, I think my primary fear was failure. Here we had done so much. We had spent a whole year planning the journey. We had made a significant financial outlay, buying new bikes, buying new gear, the plane tickets up to Prudhoe Bay, quit our jobs. We had rented out our house. So now if we fail, where do we even live? Like, our house was rented out. So I think my primary fear actually was failure.
Okay. But if you made it a year and then came back, let's say you made it down into Mexico or Central America, and you quit. Quit's not the right word, and I don't know if failure is the right word. You rode at least a year. You're terming failure as we didn't make it to the tip of Argentina. That was success, and everything else was anything else was failure. Is that right?
No, I'm not sure that I looked at it like that. Honestly, I'm not really sure. I do strongly believe that success is, if we had made a decision that we no longer wanted this, then that would be fine. Failure, in my mind, would be if we bailed simply because it was hard. Now, if it's too hard, and it literally is too hard, and we literally can't continue on, then that's different from just it being hard. Or, so I think when you make a decision, or if your dream has changed, your desires have changed, over 3 years, a lot can happen.
For sure.
And if our goal had changed and we decided that this was no longer important to us for whatever reason, that would be fine. I would have no problem with calling it off at that point. But I think what I was afraid of was not knowing where that line is and then ending up regretting calling it off.
Okay. And as a parent, it's your responsibility to determine along the way where that line is. Let's look at like the first 6 months. Then you're in Alaska, you go back into Canada and heading back down into the United States. In that first 6 months, was there a time when you guys looked at each other and thought, what are we doing? Why don't we just go back home?
I would say there were kind of two moments, and I wanted to tell both of these because I think that they illustrate different things.
Okay.
One, we were about probably 10 days in. We were still on the Dalton Highway. We were not to Fairbanks yet. We still had several days to get to Fairbanks. And now remember, there's nothing on this road, nothing. We were completely self-contained, and we wouldn't be able to get anything until we got to Fairbanks. So we stopped to filter water. We had a water filter with us, and all of our water came from rivers, and we just filtered the water to make it clean. So we stopped at a river, and we gathered all our stuff up. We went down to the river, and John starts pumping, and he pumps and pumps and pumps and pumps and pumps and pumps, and nothing comes out. The filter is broken. No idea what happened to it. And so I think we were all four just kind of in shock. Like, now what? We still have 5 days to go to Fairbanks, and we have no way to get fresh water. What do we do? And we made our way back up to our bikes, and we were standing there quietly on the side of the road, melancholy, just overwhelming us. And nobody was talking. We didn't even know what to say. And all of a sudden, this motorcyclist shows up, and he pulls up and stops next to us and says, "So, wow, what's going on here?" And John turned to this guy and said, "Our pump just broke, and we don't know what we're going to do." And this guy says, now remember, we're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And this guy says, "You know what? I've come all the way up from California. I haven't used my water filter once." He said, "I'm happy to sell it to you." Boy, score, right? So I pull out money, buy his pump from him, and we are just as happy could be. Continue on down the road, and about 30 minutes later, another motorcyclist comes up from the other direction, and he comes up right next to me, and he sticks out his hand with some money in it and says, "Here, Joe wants you to have this. He felt guilty for taking money for the pump."
Oh my God.
And I just, I kind of, at that point was where I kind of relaxed, and I said, okay, you know what? That it really is true that the universe conspires to help those who are out there doing it. The universe conspires, and there's no other way to answer this. So that was one where I kind of, I just, for a few minutes there, it was kind of like, now what? Now, fast forward a month and a half or so, we're now in Canada. And anyway, we saw a bear. John and Daryl on the tandem bicycle were about a mile or so ahead of me and Davey. So Davey and I are riding along, and we see a bear on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. And decided to stop and get a picture of the bear. Now, we stopped plenty far away. I had a good telephoto lens on my camera. I had no desire whatsoever to get close to a bear. And all of a sudden, right as I was pulling out my camera, this bear comes up onto the road, and he starts walking toward us. Now, this is not typical bear behavior. Usually bears will avoid people. They would go the other direction. But this bear started walking toward us, and Davy and I kind of just stood our ground and said, holy crap, what do we do? But there was nothing we could do. All we had were bicycles. It wasn't like we could do anything. And so we kind of just stood there, and the bear got to about 30 feet from us, which is very close for a bear.
Super close.
Yeah. And he turned and he went back down into the ditch on the side of the road. And I'm like, okay, we're good. He's gone back down to eat. We're all set. I put my camera back in the case and getting ready to go. I'm just getting ready to push off. And that bear leaps up onto the side of the road and plods across until he is standing right by my side. Now, I am not joking. I could have reached out and petted him. I stood there staring into his cold black glassy eyes, and my mind was racing, and I'm thinking, okay, now what? What does one do when one has a close encounter with a bear? And I started thinking back to all the books and brochures I had read, and they said to do 3 things. Now, the first thing you do is to remain calm, which, trust me, is easier said than done when you're face to face with a bear. The second thing they said to do was to back away slowly. But that was a problem because I had a trailer behind my bike, and if I had backed up, I would jackknife my trailer. So I really couldn't go anywhere. And then the third thing they said to do is to never turn your back to the bear. If you turn your back to the bear, that does provoke an attack. So I was kind of stuck. I couldn't move because I couldn't go back. I couldn't go to the side because bikes don't go to the side. I couldn't go to the front because I would put my back to the bear. And with each passing second, I became more and more convinced that I was about to meet my maker. But what I didn't want was my son to see his mother get mauled. And so I turned to Davy and I said, the other thing they said to do was to talk with the bear. And that one I could do. So I'm talking to the bear. It's okay, Mr. Bear. It's okay. It's okay. You can have your territory back. So I'm chatting with the bear. And so I turned to Davy and I said, Davy, honey, I need you to get out of here. I need you just very, very, very slowly, just put your feet on your pedals and very, very, very slowly ride away. We don't want to provoke a chase. I just need you to get to safety. And so Davy did what I asked him to do. He put his feet up on his pedals and he started very, very, very slowly riding away. And the bear followed. Go, Davy, go! Davy started racing down the road as fast as his little legs would carry him, and that bear was hot on his heels. I will admit that for a split second I was relieved. I no longer had a bear by my side.
Okay.
The other part of me, however, was in panic because said bear was now chasing my 10-year-old son down the road. With every ounce of motherly instinct within me, I leaped up onto my pedals and I took off after the bear. I ended up, and this is no joke, I ended up blasting past the bear. I caught up with Davy, and the two of us were barreling down the road side by side as fast as we could possibly go. We were watching in our rearview mirror as the bear was retreating back into the distance. Becoming smaller and smaller. And at one point, Davy turned to me and he said, Mom, I think we're good now. I think we can stop. And I said, not yet, Davy, not yet. And it wasn't until that bear was nothing more than an itty bitty, teeny tiny black speck in the middle of the road, way back in the distance, that I felt like we could stop. So
you made it, though.
We made it.
Oh my
we made it.
gosh!
And that night, we were curled up in the tent, and I had one boy on one side of me and the other boy on the other side of me, and I was just so very grateful. And I toyed with the idea of, do we stop?
Sure.
Is this the time to call this off?
Yep.
And I was terrified, but I came to the conclusion that this was a fluke, that this isn't something that one could normally expect to happen. People ride their bikes through bear country all the time, and this doesn't happen. And to call off the journey because of a fluke seemed foolish. Now, I did get some bear spray, and I carried bear spray with me all the way down into Central America before I finally ditched the bear spray. But
wow. All right. So you went through let's see, 15 different countries, all the way through Central America and South America. You thought it was going to take 2.5 years. Took you 3, over 1,000 days. How many days were you riding, and how many days were you not? And on your off days, what did you do?
We rode, I think I calculated this once. I think overall we rode about 40% of the days, meaning that we took a lot of days off.
Sure.
And especially once we got down into Latin America, we didn't want to just ride through and not have any kind of cultural understanding. This was the opportunity of a lifetime for our sons to get to know Latin America, and it seemed foolish to just race through. So on some of those days off, we did find that we could, in general, we could ride 3 to 4 days in a row, and then we needed to take a day or two off. We figured out real quickly that if we didn't do that voluntarily, that Mother Nature would make us do it because one of us would get sick. And so we were pretty good about setting a pace that we could handle, that we could manage. So we took a lot of days off, and if we were still tired, then we took more days off. If we were in an area with lots to do and see, we would spend time doing that. We met wonderful people, absolutely fabulous people. So it wasn't so much that we wanted to see the tourist sites. You get to the point pretty quickly where the tourist sites are pretty overrated in general. But it was more just the people, getting to know the local people. And I think being on our bikes opened us up to meeting more people than one would otherwise. And that was wonderful. We loved that. We loved getting to know the local people and enjoying just the culture of where we were. So,
were you staying in hotels or in tents every night or in people's homes?
It kind of varied. In Alaska, Canada, mainland U.S., we mostly camped. Typically we would camp. But once we got down into southern Mexico, we discovered that it was just so hot. And in our tent was just a sweat fest. Mm-hmm. If we spent the night in our tent, none of us got any sleep because it was just so hot in there. And so, but fortunately by then, hotels were cheaper, so we could afford hotels, just cheap hotels. And then reversing that, so we went all the way through the tropics, staying in hotels. And then by the time we got down into southern Peru, we started camping again. Again, by then it got more rural. There were longer distances between towns. We would still stay in hotels when we were in towns, but it would frequently be 2 or 3 or 4 days between towns, so we would camp out.
Did you have your exact routed out before you started, or did you divert?
No way. No. We did have, before we left, we knew we were going to be doing the Dalton Highway, that first 500 miles down to Fairbanks.
Sure.
And so that one was set. And then from there, you really have 2 choices. You can do the Alaska Highway or the Cassiar Highway, and they both kind of lead to the same place. Our initial plan was actually to take the Cassiar Highway. My husband had done that many years ago, and he had very fond memories, and we were kind of leaning toward the Cassiar Highway. But then we met enough cyclists on that first part of the Alaska Highway, and they said, and people who had done the Cassiar Highway. And the people coming up the Cassiar had said that they had seen lots of bears, but no other wildlife. All they had seen were bears. And the people coming up on the Alaska Highway said they had seen bears, but they had also seen buff bison, and they had seen bighorn sheep, and they had seen caribou. And there's just a wider variety of wildlife on the Alaska Highway. So we decided to do the Alaska Highway.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then after that, boy, I mean, we would look each little 300-mile segment or so and say, okay, where do we want to go?
And that's it, 300 miles at a time all the way down. All right, so you get down to the southern tip of Argentina, and let's say your final day, after 3 years, like, how did you feel that final day getting to the end and even that final mile Were you happy, sad, elated, exhausted? Like, what was going through your mind?
All of the above. We woke up that morning. We had camped, I think it was about 35 miles from Ushuaia. And we woke up that morning. It was drizzly and raining. And I remember laying there in bed and saying, no, this is the final day. It's 4 years of a year of planning, 3 years of cycling, 4 years of being focused on this day. This can't be rainy. And I refused to get out of bed. I just kind of was like, no, I just can't do this. And, finally needed to get up, and we got up, and it was just a drizzly, dreary day, but the forest around us was beautiful. It's just, I don't even know how to describe the forest down in Tierra del Fuego, but there's just all this moss dripping off the trees, and it's a magical, take what you think of in any kind of a magical, mystical story, and that's what the forests are, just amazing places. And so we packed up, and it was just very bittersweet, definitely bittersweet. Our final day of packing up, but then the amazing thing happened. We got out on the road, and just about when we were ready to hit the road, it stopped raining, and we had, 5 miles or so, and then we started climbing our final mountain pass, and right at that time, the sun came out, and as we were climbing up, we were overlooking this lake, and the sun was glinting off the little waves in the lake, and it looked like a million little diamonds shimmering and sparkling, and it was just so magical. It was almost like, again, the universe sending this message. And well, we kept going. We still had to get to Ushuaia, and a couple that lived in Ushuaia had invited us to stay with them. So they came out and they met us on the road with their bikes. And so we were riding into town, and right before you go around the final corner, before you see Ushuaia and the port in front of you, you go through this big gate where it says Ushuaia. And I remember riding through there, and I just saw, it said Ushuaia, and after so many years, it was just like this, holy crap, I'm here. And as I rode through the gate, I was just, woohoo, Ushuaia! You come around a corner, and the whole town just unfolds in front of you, and you see the port with all the ships, and we still had about 5 miles to go, and at that point the adrenaline had really kicked in, and all of us were just pumping hard. We had our final destination was this sign. There's a sign right there at the port that says end of the world, El Fin del Mundo. And I had seen this sign for 4 years, and for 4 years that's what I had been fixated on, is we're going to get to this sign at the end of the world. So we were going, and we were pumping fast. I mean, adrenaline was flowing. We were excited. And once we got into the town, and our this couple that was leading us on their bikes, they're leading us through town, so we don't have to pay attention to where we're going at all. But I remember thinking, focus, Nancy, focus. You can't get in an accident now. That's not the way you want to finish this journey. So we ended up going, and at one point we arrived down where that sign is, and this couple, they stop and point over to the sign, and Daryl immediately jumps off the back of the tandem, and he goes charging over to the sign. Boy, you can tell this was a big day for me.
For sure.
So Daryl goes racing over to the sign, and the rest of us get our bikes, and we go over to the sign, and we park our bikes, and, lots of screams and cheers and hugs, and pretty amazing.
4 years, 3 years on the road. Really amazing. So your journey is over. You guys get on a plane, and you head back to Boise. How was the transition back? Your boys are now 13 years old.
Right.
They're going back into school, right? They head back into public school. How do you transition back into your lives? And what was the first stark reality of, oh my gosh, we're back and I had forgotten about this?
Well, we came back to a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know what we wanted to do. And the whole world was our option. We could have continued cycling. We could have flown over to South Africa and ridden north. We could have flown to Australia. We could have ditched the bikes and continued traveling some other way. We could have moved anywhere. We were completely open, and we could have done whatever we wanted to do. So when everything is an option, how do you decide what you want to do? And that's hard. And we knew that we couldn't make that decision so close to the journey. We just couldn't. And so we kind of made the decision that we would come back here to Boise for 6 months. We were hoping to get a 6-month lease on a rental house. We didn't want to kick out our tenants because we didn't know if we wanted to stay here. So we were hoping that we could get a 6-month lease on a house and just kind of give ourselves 6 months to get our feet on the ground and figure out what was going on. Unfortunately, that was proved way harder to do than we thought. Nobody wanted to give 6-month leases. It was a year or nothing. Mm-hmm. So fortunately, we had arranged for a little apartment that was just on a monthly basis because we had the contacts. So we were staying in this little apartment, but we knew that wasn't a long-term solution, and we needed to figure out something else. And so, yeah, we didn't know if we wanted to stay here in Boise, if we wanted to settle down, if we wanted to keep traveling. We didn't know, and we really didn't know anything. In the end, we decided that our rental house was too big for us. We just didn't need that much space. After living in a tent for so long, we didn't need that. And we ended up finding a small house that we bought, and that's where we live now. And the boys, again, we weren't sure what was going to happen with them. They had this very extraordinary atypical experience. We didn't know if school was going to be a good fit for them or not. So they ended up going into a special program here that Boise has. It's sponsored by Micron and HP, but it is offered through the Boise schools for advanced math and science classes. And so the boys ended up just doing that. They took PE at the regular junior high, and then they took these advanced math and science classes. And they loved what they were doing. They loved their classes, and they fit right in where they were going with this advanced program. And we ended up buying the house. So yeah, but there was definitely a period in there. I likened it to just drifting in a sea of options, really. I mean, I was like bobbing out in the ocean, but instead of it being water, it was options. And how do you choose? How do you make a decision when everything is an option?
That is quite a statement. It's paralyzing with so many options. It sounds like.
Absolutely.
Wow. All right. So now we're 6 years down the road, correct? 6 or 7 years down the road.
Almost 6 years.
6 years. Okay. So the boys are 19. When you guys get back together and you're all sitting around the dinner table and you're talking about this journey, what comes up the most? Was there a moment? Was there a time? Like what comes up most frequently when just the four of you guys are talking?
That's funny. Our boys are very typical teenagers, and teenagers typically don't talk about stuff that they did when they were 10, 11, 12 years old. And so we don't talk about it a lot. It's there, and things will come up. Just the other day, I was driving Davey over to pick up contacts and started talking about beans. I guess I was cooking beans for dinner. And so we started talking about how Davey has always been a bean and tortilla fan. And I said, I remember, like Mexico, the best part of Mexico for you was that you got beans and tortillas every single meal. and he started laughing, and he said, yeah, it's true. And then he started talking about this time that we had been out walking in some little village in Mexico somewhere, and we had walked by a tortilla factory, and there were all these tortillas coming out on the belt that were just fresh. They were hot. Just coming out of the oven, and we stood there watching this process happening, and one of the ladies that worked there reached onto the belt and grabbed a tortilla and handed it to Davey. And he said, I never knew that a tortilla could taste so good. He says, I don't know what was in it or, why it was so good, but there was something about it just being fresh out of the oven that, man, it was so good. And he's 19 and that's what he remembers from Mexico when he was 10. So it's little moments. There's nothing, it's not the big stuff. It's the little stuff.
All right. Back in on May 6th, 2008 at 3:43 p.m., you tweeted your very first tweet at Family on Bikes. Do you remember what you said?
I have absolutely no idea. What did I say?
All right. I'm getting ready to take off on a 2.5-year bicycle journey from Alaska to Argentina. Your first tweet.
Oh, my gosh.
So May 6th, 2008 at 3:43 p.m. If you could sit next to yourself, jump back in 2008 and sit next to yourself and give yourself 1 minute of advice at that moment, what would you tell yourself?
Don't get overwhelmed. Take it one step at a time. And when you get enough steps put together, big things happen. And I think that's huge. I think we tend to, as people, especially when we are planning big things like this, we tend to feel like we need to have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. And the reality is that we don't.
No, you're right. Okay. You can follow Nancy, or you can check out her journey at familyonbikes.com. and on Twitter at Facebook at Family on Bikes, and also the book Changing Gears, A Family Odyssey to the End of the World. Nancy, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate that.
Hey, Life Hunters. Thank you for listening to this episode of Go Hunt Life. If you like the show and would like to support it, go to iTunes and do this. Subscribe to the show, leave a rating, and review it. It helps. And thank you. If you or someone that you know has quit their normal life to follow their dreams, I would love an introduction and maybe interview them on the show. You can find me at GoHuntLife.com and also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest at Go Hunt Life. Until next time, stay weird, dare greatly, and ripcord out.